The laughter cut through My Lin like a blade sharper than the biting Montana wind. Standing on the frozen platform in Red Bluff, her light pink prairie dress was woefully inadequate against the swirling snow, and her thin gray scarf offered little protection from the bitter cold. She watched the man who had promised her a future double-over in cruel amusement, his breath puffing out in white clouds. "Did you really think I'd marry you?" Reginald Thorne's words echoed across the station, shattering the fragile hope she had carried all the way from San Francisco. The winter of 1885 had arrived early and harsh to the Montana Territory. My Lin pressed her face against the cold glass of the train window earlier that day, watching the landscape transform into a blinding white expanse. Each mile that passed beneath the wheels of the Northern Pacific Railroad carried her further from the cramped laundry shop where she had worked for her uncle and closer to what she believed would be her destiny. She had smoothed her dress, the pink fabric a stark contrast to the grey sky, and clutched the letters that had been her lifeline. Reginald's handwriting was bold, speaking of a love that transcended their different worlds, of a warm hearth in a cold land. "Red Bluff, next stop," the conductor had called out. My Lin's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 22, a Chinese woman in a land that was often hostile to her kind, and she had guarded her virtue fiercely, saving herself for a husband she had never met. She had sold her jade hair comb, her only inheritance from her mother, to afford this ticket. It was a gamble on love, a gamble on the promises of a man who wrote of poetry and equality. But as she stepped onto the platform, the reality shattered her dreams. Reginald was there, surrounded by a group of well-dressed men who were already snickering. He wasn't wearing the red handkerchief he had promised, instead, he wore a smirk. When she called his name softly, he turned, and the cruelty in his eyes froze her blood faster than the winter air. "She actually came," Reginald announced to his friends. "I told you I could get one of them to travel all this way." "I don't understand," My Lin whispered, the cold seeping into her bones. "Your letters. You said you loved me. You said you prepared a home." "It was a wager, my dear," Reginald scoffed, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. $50 said I couldn't get a desperate exotic virgin to come to the frontier believing she'd found a husband. Looks like I'm $50 richer. The carpet bag slipped from My Lin's numb fingers, hitting the snowy platform with a dull thud. Around her, the laughter continued, a chorus of mockery. She stood perfectly still, a small figure in pink against the grey and white world, feeling the weight of her ruin. She had no money to return, no family to welcome her back, and her reputation was now dust. "That's enough." The voice came from the shadows, deep and rough like grinding stones. A man stepped onto the platform, his boots crunching heavily on the ice. He was tall, wearing a heavy shearling coat and a battered hat pulled low over dark eyes. He wasn't polished like Reginald, he looked like the land itself, rugged, weathered, and dangerous. "This doesn't concern you, Cole," Reginald sneered, though he took a step back. "Concerns anyone with eyes," the rancher, Ethan Cole, replied. His voice was steady, cutting through the cold. "You've had your fun. Now move along." "Or what?" Barnaby, one of Reginald's cronies, stepped forward. "You'll defend the honor of a washerwoman." Ethan didn't speak. He simply moved, his fist connecting with Barnaby's jaw in a blur of motion. The man crumpled to the icy wood. Ethan looked at the others, his stance relaxed but ready. "Anyone else?" Reginald's group exchanged nervous glances. They were town men, soft from easy living, while Ethan Cole looked like he wrestled bears for sport. "Come on," Reginald muttered, retreating. "We've made our point." He tipped his hat mockingly at My Lin. "Good luck, sweetheart. It's a cold night to be alone." The crowd dispersed, leaving My Lin shivering violently, tears freezing on her cheeks. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable but his eyes softening slightly. He saw the way the wind whipped through her thin pink dress. Without a word, he took off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth was instant and overwhelming, smelling of wood smoke and pine. He said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "No," she whispered, shame burning her face. "I have nothing." Ethan nodded once. I'm Ethan Cole. My ranch is 5 miles north. It's not much, but it's warm. I cannot, she stammered, clutching his coat. It is not proper. Freezing to death ain't proper either, Ethan stated. I have a bunkhouse. You'll be safe there. I give you my word. Desperation left her no choice. She followed him to his wagon, and he helped her up with a respectful grip, treating her like a lady of high standing rather than the punchline of a joke. The ride to the ranch was silent, the only sound the crunch of wheels on snow and the howling wind. Mylin watched the white world pass by, wondering if she had traded one disaster for another. Ethan's ranch was nestled in a valley protected by a ridge of pine trees. The main house was a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. He led her not to the main house, but to a smaller, well-built structure nearby, the bunkhouse. He lit the stove immediately, feeding it wood until the iron belly glowed orange. There's food in the main house, Ethan said, standing by the door. I'll bring you some. Lock the door from the inside if you feel the need. You're safe here. That night, Mylin ate a simple beef stew that tasted like salvation. She curled up under rough wool blankets, listening to the wind, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of Reginald's letters. She dreamed of a dark-eyed man who offered his coat to a stranger. The next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the world sparkling and clean. Mylin woke early, driven by a lifetime of hard work. She found a broom and swept the bunkhouse, then ventured to the main house. Ethan was already gone, attending to his cattle, but he had left coffee on the stove. She decided then that she would not be a charity case. She found the pantry, stocked with basics like flour, dried beans, and venison. By the time Ethan returned at midday, cold and covered in snow, the cabin smelled of fresh biscuits and savory broth. He stopped in the doorway, stomping the snow from his boots. You didn't have to do that. You gave me shelter, Mylin said, her chin held high. I pay my debts. I can cook and clean. Ethan took a seat at the table, watching her. He was a man of few words, scarred by a past he didn't speak of, living a solitary life that suited him. But seeing this woman, so small yet so fierce, moving around his kitchen, stirred something in him that had long been dormant. The food is good, he said after the first bite. Better than my cooking, that's for sure. That is not a high bar, she replied with a small, tentative smile. Over the next few weeks, a routine formed. Mylin took over the household duties, transforming the bachelor cabin into a home. She mended his torn shirts and scrubbed the floors until the wood gleamed. In the evenings, they sat by the fire. Ethan would whittle wood or repair tack, and Mylin would sew, using scraps of fabric she found to make the place more welcoming. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable. Ethan learned that Mylin was educated, that she had learned English from the missionaries in San Francisco, and that she valued honor above all else. She learned that Ethan was a veteran of the Civil War, a man who had seen too much death and sought peace in the solitude of the mountains. He treated her with absolute respect, never crossing the line of propriety, honoring the fact that she was an unmarried woman under his protection. One evening, as the snow piled high against the windows, Mylin asked, "Why did you help me?" Everyone else laughed. Ethan looked into the fire. "I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. And I know what it's like to be promised a future that gets snatched away." He looked at her then. "You have a spine of steel, Mylin. Reginald Thorne is a fool." The warmth in his eyes made her heart race. She had come to Montana for a fantasy, but she was finding reality, rough, cold, and hard, to be infinitely more appealing because of the man sharing it with her. However, supplies eventually ran low, and a trip to Red Bluff became necessary. Mylin was terrified to show her face in town, but Ethan insisted she come. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he told her. "Hold your head up." The town was bustling despite the cold. As they walked into Mrs. Higgins' general store, the whispers started. Eyes followed them, the hulking rancher and the Chinese woman in the pink dress, which she still wore, though now covered by a heavy wool shawl Ethan had bought her. Mrs. Hattie Higgins, a formidable woman with grey hair and a no-nonsense attitude, looked up from the counter. She took one look at My Lin's apprehensive face and Ethan's protective stance. "Well, don't just stand there letting the heat out," Hattie barked. "Come in. You must be My Lin. I've heard the talk, and I say any woman who survives a winter in that bunkhouse deserves a medal." Hattie's kindness was a balm. She helped My Lin pick out sturdy fabric for new clothes, warm wools in deep blues and greens, practical for ranch life. But as they were leaving the store, their path was blocked. Reginald Thorne stood there, swaying slightly, clearly drunk. His previous amusement had turned into something uglier. The town had not celebrated his prank as he had hoped. Instead, many frowned upon the cruelty, and he blamed My Lin for his social decline. "Look at this," Reginald slurred. "The washerwoman playing house with the hermit. How much did he pay for you?" Ethan stepped forward, his body a wall between My Lin and the drunkard. "Step aside, Thorne." "She's mine by rights," Reginald spat. "I paid for her ticket. That makes her my property." He reached out to grab My Lin's arm. Before Ethan could move, My Lin stepped out from behind him. She didn't look down. She looked Reginald straight in the eye. "I am not property. I am a person. And I would rather freeze in the snow than let a man like you touch me." Reginald raised his hand to strike her, but his wrist was caught in a vice-like grip. Ethan twisted the arm, forcing Reginald to his knees in the snow. "Touch her again," Ethan whispered, his voice low and terrifying, "and you won't have a hand left to drink with." He shoved Reginald into a snowbank. "We're leaving." They rode back to the ranch in silence, but the air between them had shifted. It was charged with something new. That evening, after dinner, Ethan didn't go to his chair by the fire. He stood by the window, watching the moonlight on the snow. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "He does not matter," My Lin said, standing beside him. "He is small. You are not small." Ethan turned to her. He reached out, his calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "My Lin, I'm a man with nothing but a ranch and a bad past. I'm not a poet like the man you thought you were coming for." "I do not want a poet," she whispered. "I want a man who keeps his word. A man who sees me." "I see you," Ethan said huskily. "I've seen nothing else since that day on the platform." He kissed her then, not with the rough passion of a whirlwind romance, but with the steady, consuming heat of a hearth fire in winter. It was a promise, a seal on the bond that had been growing between them. But peace in the West was rarely long-lasting. 2 days later, a blizzard struck, trapping them at the ranch. In the midst of the storm, a knock came at the door. It was Sarah, a young woman from town, battered and blue with cold. She had fled an abusive husband, desperate for sanctuary. Ethan didn't hesitate. He brought her in, and My Lin tended to her wounds. For 3 days, the storm raged, and the three of them existed in a bubble of survival. Sarah watched My Lin and Ethan, seeing the unspoken love between them. "You two should be married," Sarah whispered to My Lin one night while Ethan was checking the barn. "He looks at you like you're the only warmth in the world." "I am Chinese," My Lin said quietly. "It is not simple." "It's simple if you love him," Sarah countered. The storm broke, but it brought trouble. Sarah's husband, a brute named Vance, rode up with Reginald Thorne and 3 other men. They were drunk, armed, and looking for a fight. "Send out the girl," Vance shouted. "And the China woman too. Thorne says she needs to learn her place." Ethan grabbed his rifle from above the mantel. He looked at My Lin. "Take the shotgun. Go to the back room with Sarah. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you shoot." "No," My Lin said, taking the shotgun but standing her ground. "I will not hide. This is my home too." Ethan looked at her, pride warring with fear in his eyes. "All right. Stay low." Ethan stepped onto the porch. "Get off my land, Vance." "Thorne." "We're taking what's ours," Reginald yelled, emboldened by the numbers. He raised his pistol. The gunfight was brief and chaotic. Bullets splintered the wood of the cabin. Ethan fired with the precision of a soldier, dropping one man and sending another scrambling for cover. Vance charged the porch, but Ethan tackled him, the two men rolling in the snow. Reginald saw his chance. He kicked open the door, a malicious grin on his face. "Now, my dear." He froze. Mylin stood in the center of the room, the heavy double-barreled shotgun leveled at his chest. She didn't tremble. She didn't look like a victim in a pink dress. She looked like the mistress of the ranch. "I told you," she said, her voice steady. "I am not property." Reginald laughed nervously. "You won't shoot. You don't have the stomach for it." He took a step forward. Mylin pulled the trigger. The blast blew the door frame apart inches from Reginald's head, peppering him with splinters and wood dust. He shrieked, falling backward off the porch into the snow, scrambling away in sheer terror. "Next one is for your heart," she screamed, pumping the action. Outside, Ethan had subdued Vance. The sudden explosion and Reginald's terrified retreat broke the spirit of the attackers. They scrambled for their horses, defeated by a lone rancher and a woman they had underestimated. Ethan stood in the snow, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. He looked at Mylin, standing in the doorway with the smoking gun. He walked up the steps, took the weapon gently from her hands, and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, the adrenaline fading into shaking sobs. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You did good. You did real good." The following spring, when the snow finally melted and the wildflowers painted the valley in colors of purple and gold, a small wedding was held at the ranch. Mrs. Hattie Higgins stood as a witness, along with Sarah, who had stayed on to help run the house. Mylin did not wear white, nor did she wear pink. She wore a dress of deep crimson silk that she had sewn herself, embroidered with gold thread, a nod to her heritage, worn proudly in her new home. Ethan wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, looking every bit the proud groom. They stood before the circuit judge on the porch where they had defended their lives. When Ethan slipped the gold band onto her finger, he didn't laugh. He wept, just a single tear that he quickly wiped away, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a cruel bet to his station and left him with a treasure. Reginald Thorne left town shortly after the raid, humiliated and broken, never to be seen in the territory again. He became a cautionary tale in Red Bluff, a story told about the price of arrogance. Years passed. The ranch grew, prospering under the combined efforts of Ethan and Mylin. They had a daughter, a little girl named Lily, who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's fierce spirit. She grew up running through the tall grass, speaking both English and Cantonese, loved fiercely by parents who knew the value of what they had found. One winter evening, 10 years later, Mylin stood on the porch, watching the snow fall. It was soft tonight, peaceful. She wore a heavy coat, but underneath, tucked away in a trunk, was that old pink dress. She kept it not as a memento of pain, but as a reminder of the journey. Ethan stepped out behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Cold?" "No," she smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "I am never cold anymore." They watched the snow cover the valley, burying the past, leaving only the pristine white canvas of their future. The man who had laughed at her tears was a ghost of a memory, irrelevant and forgotten. The man who held her now was her reality, her rock, and her heart. The lone rancher had given the Chinese virgin his heart, and in return, she had given him a life worth living. Reflecting on Mylin and Ethan's journey reveals a profound truth about the human spirit. Their story teaches us that true worth is not found in the color of one's skin or the status they hold, but in the content of their character and the resilience of their heart. It reminds us that family is often built not just by blood, but by shared struggles and the choice to protect one another against the world. Furthermore, the narrative highlights that forgiveness is not always about absolving those who hurt us, but about releasing the power they have over our future. Mylin's ability to stand strong in the face of humiliation and prejudice serves as a powerful testament to the strength of self-worth. Ultimately, love is shown to be in action, a warm coat in a blizzard, a defense against cruelty, rather than just empty words on a page. What did you think of my Lynn's reaction to Reginald's return? Would you have been as brave as she was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story of love and justice in the Wild West, please subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.